Given we have quorum, I'll call the meeting of the Finance Committee to order. Looking to the agenda, are there any changes, additions to the agenda? Seeing none, I'll move the agenda be approved as presented. Those in favor, opposed, motion's carried unanimously. Moving on to item C, the minutes. Errors or omissions on the minutes? Seeing none, I'll move to be adopted as presented. Those in favor, opposed, minutes are adopted. And we'll jump right into item D1, the 2018 financial report. Year-to-date as at April 30th. Ms. Van Kaimpima.
Good afternoon, Your Worship, members of the Finance Committee. I'm not responsible for the heat or lack thereof. Okay. No, although I do like things cooler. But so I'm before you this afternoon to first of all present the year-to-date financial report, year-to-date being April 30th. The recommendation from administration is that the Finance Committee accept the year-to-date financial report as at April 30th, 2018 for information. But I did want to bring your attention to a few items of note, and those are those contained in the report that accompanies your agenda package. Just to let you know that RCMP fine revenue is continuing its decline, which it has been for the past couple of years. ICE rental and registered adult program revenues are trending lower than we had anticipated, and that's even before any impact that the renovations at the rec center would have on revenues. The adult program revenue is slightly offset by lower contracted services because a lot of those programs are put on by contracted services. So if we don't have the uptake of the program, we don't hire the contractor. Something else to let you know, the planning revenue, in case you didn't already know, continues to exceed budget. We continue to have a busy development in town. And just to give you a report on where we are, as you know or may not recall, we budget for payroll slippage. And so the budget for 2018 is for slippage of $268,000. And as at the end of April, we were at 219. So we're well on our way to achieving that target. And that concludes my presentation on this, and I would really welcome any questions that you might have.
Super, thanks for that. I just have a couple of questions. The report's pretty straightforward. And the roll-up regarding economic development. Just interested in the increase of revenues through the business registry. I mean, that's quite a bit, 37,000 additional revenue.
Yeah.
Do we have any idea what's, obviously there's new businesses in town. Do we have any breakdown on, I don't know, percentage of those that are home base or anything like that?
No, I haven't done that analysis, but I would be more than happy to bring that to the next presentation on financial reporting, or would you like it sooner?
No, actually, an email or something. I'm just curious. Okay. Yeah. Because that's no more than a 10% increase, isn't it?
Mr. Mayor?
Ms. DeSoto?
I think it's important to note that that 2018 budget number had been unchanged since about 2015. And in fact, you know, it was because we weren't actively managing that budget over the last several years. When we were doing the budget for 2018 for the Economic Development Department, we simply used the figure that was sort of last available. In looking at actuals from 2017, I believe actuals were more in line with this year's actuals for 2017. So it's not that that's all happened in 2017. I think that's been business growth over the last 2 to 3 years.
Okay, sure. That makes more sense. Thanks. And on the recreation roll-up, and I don't recall, I might have asked the same question last year, but note the continued decline in registered adult programming. Do we have any information on what's informing that? Cottle?
Yeah, so there's, with the Recreation Master Plan, the consultant identified that as a bit of a national trend where there's fewer and fewer people. What people want is the ability to recreate when it works for them, not to have to be at a certain place at 5:30 every Wednesday. So while there's an increase in recreation participation, it tends to be in the unplanned drop-in kind than in the registered program. So while our numbers in registered programs are quite low, the number of people who drop in to an exercise class at Elevation Place that they don't have to, it doesn't matter if they're there 1 week and not there the next week, those numbers are quite high. It's the paid regular programming, and that's part of a larger trend in adult recreation.
Great, thanks for that explanation. I sort of remember the conversation a year ago. Are there other questions from members of council to this report? Seeing none, thanks for your presentation.
Thank you.
And I'll then move that the Finance Committee accept the year-to-date financial report as at April 30th, 2018 for information. Discussion on the motion. Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Moving on to item D2. Provide a report on investments.
Yeah, so thank you very much. As part of our investment policy, at a minimum once a year, our policy now requires that I provide you with information on where our investments are at. So to give you a little bit of background information, we have two predominant investments, and then there's a small one. We have a security deposit that we have a GIC, Guaranteed Investment Certificate of the Bank Montreal for, so that's the bottom line. But our main investments we split between long-term and short-term. So for the most part, our long-term are held through CIBC Wood Gundy, and the short-term is invested through investment advisors through Canaccord, as well as the Bow Valley Credit Union. The Bow Valley Credit Union had approached me, probably about 9-10 months ago, and said, would there be an opportunity to get some of our business because they're being local, so we had transferred over, but they're only able to handle a maximum of $2 million in investments. That's why the majority of it's not with the Bow Valley Credit Union. So right now, up on your screen, sorry, did you have a question?
Just to that point, so why is the Bow Valley Credit Union not able to handle more than that?
I didn't get into why. They just said we can only take a maximum of $2 million.
Okay.
Which really, at this point, doesn't meet a lot of our needs, but I felt it still was important to support local.
Sure. Yep. Okay. Thank you.
So the long-term investments are held with CIBC Wood Gundy. The last time that particular investment services have gone out for requests for proposals was before I started as the manager of finance. So my plan is this year to send that out for requests for proposals just to make sure that we're getting good value for our dollars. So that's a heads up on that. The book value, so that's the amount, the dollars that we paid when we bought these investments, right now is just over $48 million. The interest rates range from 2.25 to just under 5%. And so far, up to the end of April, we have received just over $340,000 in interest from those long-term investments, and they mature. And those are the ones that, in the investment policy, it talks about investing as a ladder. So you don't have everything coming due at the same time. You don't put all your eggs into the one interest rate at the same time. So that's why we have staggered dates of maturity. You may see that the furthest out is 2031 and go, what? These investments are bonds. They're actively traded on the bond market, which means there's always a market for them to buy and sell them. So sometimes there's bonds that people don't really have the intention of ever holding till 2031, but they see as the interest rates are fluctuating, when is a good time to sell it, when is a good time to buy it. So we're not locked in. None of these are locked in. We can sell these bonds at any time. So that ensures liquidity. And this is where I tend to invest the money that I don't feel we'll need for cash flow purposes. So if I know we're not going to need the money for a while, I'll put it into a long-term investment. And it used to be all of our investment dollars were at CIBC Wood Gundy, and all of them were in the bond market. So since I came on, I've decided to, sometimes we have money sitting in our checking account and we don't earn a lot of interest in our checking account. So that's when I started investing money that we'll need within the next year or so in a short term. So we earn more interest than we would if it's sitting in the checking account. And that comes through Canaccord and a bit through Bow Valley Credit Union. So the balance in there is $15.6 million. The rates range from 1.9 to 2.3. Interest rates are rising, so we're finding higher and higher interest rates are being offered to us every time something comes up for renewal. Year-to-date interest that we've actually received is just shy of $72,000, and the maturity dates range from July of 18 through March of 19. So as you can see, those are shorter-term timeframes. They're all within 1 year of today. And then there's a bit with the Bow Valley Credit Union. Yeah, so that concludes my presentation. If you have any questions on the investments.
Sure, just on the chart, it notes a really small amount with BMO, 13,000.
Yeah, that's that security deposit that we have to hold separately. One of our contractors has given us a security deposit, and so part of the agreement in the contract is to hold that separately. Okay. So that was set up, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, and so that's why it just keeps getting renewed, and it's held through the Bank of Montreal, because that's our banking bank.
But it matures in April next year.
We renew it every year.
Okay, maybe, why do we have that?
Because we're holding somebody's security deposit, and when you're holding a security deposit, you actually have to pay them interest. So this way we keep it separate, and that's the interest it's earned on the security deposit, and then when the time comes to pay it back, they would get the balance of that separate investment.
But we've been holding that for years, you said?
Yes.
It's reasonable to ask why it's been years?
Oh, no, it's somebody who's doing contract work for us currently.
Oh, I see. So that's against an ongoing contract of whatever it is that...
Yes.
I see.
Yeah, it's not a developer.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Thanks. Councillor Stanford.
Thank you, Your Worship. My apologies for being late. I couldn't find a place to park. It's July.
Supposed to ride your bike.
Yeah, well, that wasn't happening, was it?
Bus is free.
That would have been nice, but not today. I just had a question for you about the chart that you have under this one about the Government of Canada T-bill index.
Yes.
So you had the yields negative 0.7% on the 6-month. So is that the yield in comparison to what we're actually getting?
No, so that's me going on to the Bank of Canada website and saying, okay, so what has been the yield on Canadian T-bills? And that's what has come off. So T-bills have actually lost value over the period of time. So the reason that's provided, one, our investment policy requires that we sort of monitor how well our investments are doing in comparative to the market, and one measure or performance measure is the Canadian T-bills. So that's why I had provided that in our report. So just to let you know, we're actually earning positive interest, and during that time, the T-bills actually were earning negative interest.
Okay, but you had there that that was a 1.14%. The short-term rate was 1.14%?
Decrease.
Oh, that.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry,
yeah.
That was.
Yeah, so the 3-month, so if I look at over a 6-month period, the T-bills were yielding a negative 0.7%. But if I take a look and say, okay, if today I want to go buy T-bills, and I want them to be a 3-month T-bill, what rate could I get? That's the 1.14.
Okay, so the lower time period had a higher yield.
It actually had a lower yield because it was in the negatives.
Oh, below the rate, okay.
Yeah.
I'm just, like, I'm trying to figure out what's a comparison here.
Yeah.
Because we're yielding somewhere between 2.5, 2.25, and 4.89, so.
Yeah. Well, if you look at the 1.14, that's a short-term rate.
Right.
So if I went and bought a T-bill today, I get 1.14.
Right.
If I look at our short-term investments, our interest rates are 1.9 to 2.3. So every interest rate is significantly over that short-term rate. And obviously, if I went into another sort of performance indicator that was more long-term, then I would compare that rate to our long-term investments and see if we were in line with that.
Okay, so this is demonstrating to us that we're getting a much better yield than what that benchmark is with the Government of Canada T-bill?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes.
I was just trying to understand that, and I thought I almost had it, but thanks for explaining it.
I'll do a better job of explaining next time.
Question along the same lines. So in the long-term investment, it indicates the interest received to the end of April was 346,000, but that's less than the lower interest rate on 48 million.
Mhm.
So is it just a matter of timing, or?
Yeah, so bonds typically pay interest every 6 months. So it depends on when your bond pays interest as to whether or not it's included in that. I know there's another big whack of interest that comes in June, so it wouldn't be reflected in April.
Great, thank you. Are there other questions from council regarding this report? Seeing none, we don't need any motion to approve for information or anything?
No, I just had provided it
Okay.
for your information.
Great, then we'll move on to item D3.
All right, now comes the meat of the matter. Why, we're all really here. So this afternoon, we get to decide on the budget and business plan guidelines so that over the summer, while you're taking your break after today, administration can get busy putting together budgets and then cutting budgets and doing them again, so that come November, through a series of finance committee meetings, we can do a presentation of the budgets and the deliberations. But the things that we decide today will really help guide administration as we do our work over the summer. So the recommendation is that the Finance Committee approve the 2019 to 2024, and I'll explain why it's that length of time, budget and business plan guidelines as presented. So, as you know, we did have a information workshop a couple of weeks ago leading up to this to try and give some background information. So I'm not going to spend a whole bunch of time going into all of the background information, but give you bits that will be to the point of what we're going to be talking about and deciding on this afternoon. So the new, as you know, the Municipal Government Act has changed. They are now requiring councils and administrations to plan longer term than 1 year at a time. And those new requirements come in, you have to have it in place and start doing it by 2020. Ahead of that, we sort of anticipated that, and our last budget process said, hey, let's try approving 2 years at a time and see how that works. Maybe we can work up some bugs, and that's what we did. So now 2018 is the end of our 2-year approval, so the next round is up. So yes, we're a year ahead, but it kind of makes sense to not wait till 2020. So beginning in 2020, municipalities have to adopt a minimum of a 3-year operating and a 5-year capital budget plans, and they have to approve a minimum of 1 year for each of those. So Council's current strategic plan covers 2019 to 2022, so a 4-year period of time, and you passed that just recently. So my recommendation is to approve a 4-year operating and a 6-year capital budget plans, and those will lay out the activities and the resulting funding that's going to be required to implement the whole 4 years of your strategic plan. Then the idea is to just approve the first 2 years, so then that gives you a chance in the middle of your strategic plan to redo, relook, tweak, change it. Are we heading where you want to go? Not heading where you want to go? So there is an opportunity at the midpoint to still make those adjustments. So hence my recommendation in the budget and business guidelines that we prepare 4-year operating and 6-year capital plans. Another reason is that municipal affairs requires that in every year you have a minimum of a 3-year operating plan and a minimum of a 5-year capital plan. So if we approve 2019 and 2020 and don't make any updates, when we get to 2020, we wouldn't have 3 years if we just approved 3 years now. So we need the extra year on the end so that when we get to year 2, we're meeting those minimums. So that was the other thought process behind that. So some of the highlights that are in the guidelines. To approve the 2019 and 2020 operating and capital budgets, and then adopt a 19 through 22 operating plan and a 19 to 24 capital plan. So that's that 4-year operating, 6-year capital. So departments are to operate within their approved multi-year budgets so that the total spend over the 2 years is not exceeded, rather than each year in isolation. So what we did last time was approve 2 one-year budgets, and what administration is recommending is to really look at it as a pure multi-year, where you need to make sure you're coming in budget over those 2 years. That doesn't mean that managers get to just do whatever they want and worry about it tomorrow. There is a process in place in the budget amendments policy that we have, as well as in these guidelines, where approval to carry forward any dollars into the next year would have to go through the CAO. And there would be a 2020 budget consideration. So in the fall of 2019, we would still look and see what did we have some extraordinary items, or prices came in fundamentally different than what we had originally budgeted for. So just like we had the last time, a budget amendments opportunity, we would do the same thing in the fall of 2019. Administration would still report on budget transfers that the CIO authorizes in accordance with the budget amendments policy, as well as our finance department would prepare a continuity schedule to help council and the public to follow budget changes. So one of the things we heard was that there was some difficulty if you looked at your original budget document and then tried to see where did those numbers come from. And it isn't just the budget amendments that changes those numbers, but council quite often will have a report where there's a request to modify a budget, and then that doesn't necessarily get remembered or necessarily recorded. So sometimes it's difficult to follow the bouncing ball. So part of the recommendations that I'm making is that I'm going to task my department to see if we can come up with some way that we can have a place, one-stop shopping, where you can sort of try and follow those numbers a little bit better. You still, even though you approve 2 years and we have to stay within budget over the 2 years, you still have annual financial statements. You will still have a calculation of an annual deficit or surplus, and with a surplus, council at the end of year 1, which is 2019, would still allocate that surplus. So that doesn't change with the multi-year. So to kind of give you, I think I had given you some examples. So for example, if we have a bad snow year in 2019 and we end up going over budget in snow removal, then rather than that's it, you're now cut off and now snow removal is over budget. But maybe the next year it's a big Chinook year and we're going to be under budget in the snow removal. Rather than, oh well, now we need to cover money for the snow removal that was now we can put money back in the reserve and we're doing all of that. It allows the department that manages the snow removal to manage that over the 2-year period, rather than coming to council for every year if there's something that's different. So that's the thought process behind that. That doesn't mean that administration has carte blanche. CAO still has oversight, and there will be reporting to the Finance Committee on that.
Would that reporting be quarterly or when it occurs?
Well, we normally don't do the transfers until the end of the year, so as part of the annual financial reporting, we would bring that to you.
Okay, so in the example you used, snow clearing budget, if Public Works needs to draw down basically from the next year's budget, would council know that had happened at the time, or not until the
Well, not at the time. It would be at the year end.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay. So we know.
So that's 2 sub 1. Some of these I didn't necessarily speak to, but they are in the guidelines. So the next one to talk about is 2 sub 4 and 5. So the development of the budget. So the idea is we have our marching orders to bring the Finance Committee preliminary 2019 through 2022 operating budgets. Right now, the guidelines say our marching orders are tried to not exceed a 5% property tax increase in each of those years. That we're supposed to bring a 6-year capital budgets, but we're only going to include detailed sheets for the 2 years we'll approve. The rest of them are like last time, where it's just sort of on a summary sheet. And that we're going to work this summer to determine what the annual capital funding envelope is, so that we can make sure that we're budgeting projects that fit within the envelope rather than budgeting projects and trying to find the money. So.
Councillor Sanford, did you have a question?
Yeah. Speaking of the capital budget sheets, Just further to Mayor Borman's question about how you would transfer something into the next year. So if there's a capital budget sheet where there's, say, $50,000 allocated, the actual cost was $19,000, what would happen to the residual of that $50,000 capital budget?
Yeah, so when I talk about staying within budget within the 2 years, that's sort of a change to the operating, because we hadn't done that before. Capital, once the like we have the ability, if you've spent, to carry over a project automatically. We're already sort of doing that, stay within your budget for that project. So if the project comes in, it was budgeted at 50, and the costs to date are 19, but a project is finished, then that money just becomes available in the next budget cycle for other projects.
So that would roll over into the second year? Is that what
No,
you're
we
saying?
wouldn't.
Oh,
Once the project's done,
Okay.
it's done.
so it's not drawn out of the capital reserve, in other
No.
words?
No. So I'll give you an example. Say, for
Yeah.
example, we have a capital project that's $50,000 and it's going to be funded from the general capital reserve. So the actual dollars for the project comes in at $19,000 and the project is finished. Alls we would do is we would draw $19,000 from the general capital reserve, and that would leave the remaining $31,000 to allocate the next budget cycle.
Okay, but if it's not allocated in that second year,
Oh, then
another project could come in there?
it
Oh,
could.
okay.
But
Okay.
like, as you know, we have lots, sometimes we have years where there's lots of changes and projects that maybe came in over the original cost, or we want to change or expand the scope. And then that allows us to have money in the reserves to have a little bit more nimbleness when it comes to those unexpected things during the year.
Okay. And we've broken out our capital reserve now into a replacement reserve, is that correct?
Yes.
So we have to draw from either or for the particular purpose?
Yeah,
that we
so
do,
the
yeah.
work this summer, when we're doing the work on funding the different capital projects in the budget, that will be a consideration, and we're going to try and see what we can do about, is this a new project, which would be general capital? Is this a rehab and replacement out of asset rehab and replacement reserve? But remember, the asset replacement and rehabilitation reserve levels are not where they need to be, so that'll all have to be factored in November.
Okay, good, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. So that's sections 4 and 5. Section 6 deals with our partners and affiliates, and right now I'll apologize if I missed the logo for any one of our partners and affiliates. I tried to get them all. We will be asking them, once you approve the budget business guidelines, I have already drafted an email that will go out to them right after this meeting to give them their budget marching orders. So subsection 6 deals with partners and affiliates. So we're going to be asking them to provide for-year budget requests so that we have those dollars in our operating budgets, because their requests do form part of our operating budget. And the Finance Committee will decide if, how, and when you want to hear verbal budget presentations. But what we found is our partners and affiliates want to make sure that you understand the good work that they do, who they are, what they do in the community, and that's important that you know that before you go into considering their requests. So historically, it's taken a day or more to hear from affiliates during budget time when we already have a number of meetings. So this year, what we thought we would do is, in my email, I'm going to invite them to contact Ms. Hyde, although I didn't speak to her yet, to get on the agenda for committee of the whole meetings, and then just like the library did a few weeks ago, to be able to come and give you a presentation, not on their budget request, but on who they are and what they do, so that you have that knowledge before you're heading into budget deliberations. Okay.
Just while we're on that slide, so we talked about this at the planning meeting, and it fits within our own vision of working with longer approved budgets. But I think it's important to recognize that with some of our affiliates, preparing a 4-year budget is almost impossible. I don't know what sort of conversation we can have with them in terms of expectation. I mean, typically, my experience has been, even with a 2-year budget, the affiliate will basically take this year's budget, just maybe add 5% or something, and that's the next year budget, which isn't really meaningful. So, do Do you have any thoughts about how we can work with the affiliates in that way?
Yeah, so preliminarily, again, in that email, I've tried to make it clear what the expectation is. Try and do a really good job of 19 and 20, and then 21 and 22, like, just have some numbers, and we'll have an opportunity, and you'll tweak the numbers as we get to the fall of 2020, and then those will be looked at again. And I tried to explain to them why we're doing this, but I don't think it's a bad thing to get affiliates to start looking a little longer term too, because I'm sure they all have business plans where their business plan covers more than 1 year.
Yeah, it's not a bad thing at all. It's just many of them have maybe 3 staff resource in the whole organization.
Yeah,
So, yeah, it's not easy, but it's good practice.
yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
business practice.
Change can be difficult to manage, especially when you don't have a bunch of people to help you manage that change. But I do know that each of our groups do have a liaison at the town that might be able to help them through that if they have some questions. Not that we can prepare their budgets for them, but at least answer some questions in areas
Sure.
that they might not have that expertise.
Yeah, that's a good suggestion.
Okay.
Great, thanks.
So skipping to 210, this is the area that deals with salaries, wages, and benefits, so no big change here. What we do is we have a salary grid, and periodically we'll do a compensation review. And so what we do is we, every year, recommend that we increase the budget or the salary grid by the cost of living. Because we found there were years back before me where we didn't do that, and then we did a compensation survey, and then we found out we were quite far behind our competitors and neighbors, and so we'd have to have a big budget adjustment to catch us back up again. So we found, since we've been increasing our salary compensation grid by cost of living each year, that we don't fall behind nearly like that used to happen. So that's the recommendation. So subsection 10 just kind of gives marching orders to my partner in crime, Mr. Irwin, how to sort of calculate how we're going to do the cost of living increases, and so that's all the gobbledygook about that. Basically what I said is do a really good job for 2019, take a look and do an analysis or a projection for 2020. We'll tweak it when we do budget amendments, and then 21 and 22, because it's just for planning purposes, we will just use the same rate as we did for 2020. Okay. So the next one is the operating transfer to capital. So in my orientation to all things financial at the town of Canmore, I talked about how we try and use some of the current year's tax dollars to fund capital projects. And so the goal is to use 5% of the previous year's municipal property taxes, and that's the number we use to fund some of the capital projects. We haven't been able to meet that goal in the last couple of years. We've made progress towards it. But every year in the guidelines we say, yep, 5%, and then November comes and we'll see where we land. But at least the marching orders are start there. And so that would be $1.15 million. Million, not thousand. $1,000 will fund a lot of capital projects. Okay, I take back the K, put an M in there instead. Okay. So that's what that section does for us. The next one deals with budget amendments, so that's the process for the fall of 2019 in order to do some adjustments to 2020. Just again, as we had sort of set out last time, it's not going to be a wholesale opening up of the budgets. It's be for extraordinary items. We do budget for a contingency in 2020, and council has to approve any draw from that contingency. So we anticipate those draws from the contingency decisions would be made as part of the budget amendments. As you may recall, for 2018, we didn't actually need to draw anything from the contingency that we had budgeted. The CIO can authorize carry forward of department year 1 surpluses into year 2, but again, that wouldn't just be everybody, and for no particular reason, there would have to be a good argument as to why. You would need to carry that forward. There was something at the time you made the budget for 2020 that you really see coming at you now that you hadn't budgeted for, but you have some money left over from 19. If you can make a strong argument, the CIO may authorize you to carry that forward into 2020. Otherwise, it would form part of any organizational surplus or reduce a deficit that council would then decide what to do with. at the end of 2019. So departmental year one shortfalls, we have to make it up in year two. So that's that snow removal, right? So if we go over budget in 2019, then the expectation is in 2020, you need to make that up. The annual surplus and deficit reporting will still happen. The Finance Committee will still allocate any surplus that we have at year end. And as we always do, capital budget amendments can be made throughout the years, which we do already.
Just on that slide,
Yeah.
if you don't mind, would you rather wait till the end? Or?
No, it's good.
So 14D, and we sort of touched on that a few minutes ago. So notes that if there's a departmental surplus, it's operating surplus, obviously, with a compelling argument. A compelling argument. So what do you have in mind what would be a compelling argument to carry forward a surplus?
Okay, here's an example. So last year, the policing contract came in under what was budgeted. But after having prepared the budgets, perhaps the manager of protective services gets a notification from the RCMP, like RCMP master plan, where they now say that they're actually going to need more than we originally budgeted for the RCMP contract. So in that case, if the approved budget covered those 2 years when those two things happened, rather than putting the surplus from the RCMP contract from year one into a reserve and then needing to take it back out for year two, the manager of protective services could make an argument through the CAO to say, okay, we know we're going to need this money to make up for this under budgeted amount in the following year. That would be extraordinary. But if it's like, oh, well, I just overestimated contracted services, but I might need them next year, that's not a compelling argument. And that would not be something that I would expect the CAO to authorize.
And what do you think might trigger or prompt the CAO to talk with council about that before it's been approved? Maybe the CAO would like to.
What would? Sorry?
Yeah, can you imagine,
I think we would default to being as transparent and open. I see these finance committee meetings as the appropriate time to share all of that information. And as Ms. Van Kuypema suggested, she and her team are going to come up with a tracking mechanism that wouldn't just be available to council, but would be available to the public, who could also look at the budget and see where there had been some adjustments made. So the intent is to be fully transparent with all of those decisions.
Of course, I understand that. I'm just trying to imagine. It could be, arguably, could be quite a bit of operating surplus that would be moved to the next year's budget. And it'd be nice to know how council's going to learn about that at the time.
So I think it would be through these finance committee meetings that we would share the intent and certainly get your input and feedback on that.
So input and feedback on those decisions.
Yes.
Which isn't exactly how it's indicated in this.
Yeah, the intent is not to seek council approval for each adjustment that's made. But the intent is not to hide any of the decisions being made or the reasons in which they would be made.
Okay, well, we'll see how it plays out. So on the auditing, the year-end audit, how would the auditor handle that sort of a situation where money was approved in the budget for this year and it's being pushed out into the following year, not related to capital, just operating?
Yeah, so the financial statements are the financial statements, and they report on the actual results of the organization. Then they look at the budget, and it's included in the financial statements, but it's not the focus of their reporting. So they would report on 2019, what actually happened, and then they would report on 2020, what actually happened. And as you know, when we do bring you the audited financial statements, we always do an administrative reconciliation, because there's things that are in financial statements that aren't their accrual accounting, so things like amortization, we record transfers to and from reserves, those aren't included in financial statements. So part of that reporting would also be the reporting of, okay, so here's the adjustments to the budget, so that would happen in April as far as when it comes to the audited stuff. But I also see that is to informing you as part of the budget amendment practices. When we're doing the budget amendments and review in the fall, that's another really great opportunity to let you know this is trending over and we're anticipating that we're going to need to carry forward this over budget into the next year. Or, you know what, this has come in under budget, but we're anticipating this thing coming up. So we're going to look at to get CAO approval to carry forward a bit of that budget to cover off the next year's overage. So I do see that there's a lot of reporting opportunities, and I don't see this impacting the audited financial statements because that's a report on actuals.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Right. So that's sort of the kind of the bigger buckets or things that I wanted to talk to you about in the budget and business guidelines. What might also help you when you're deciding what the guidelines should look like for your once you get it all decided and approved. To give you a little bit of background information, so setting the stage a little bit. So just to let you know, 1% tax increase is equal to almost or about $230,000. Planning and development revenue is continuing to go, which you also found in that April 30th year-to-date report. Revenue from new 2018 growth. So if you will recall, when it came time to set the property tax rate for 2018, we had more taxes available from growth than we had thought. There are new debt servicing costs. So we have had, for example, the rec center redevelopment. When we take the debt, there will be debt servicing costs in the following 6 months after that. So that's an increase. Cost of living that we talked about for the salaries, wages, and benefits, currently the rate is 2%, which if we had to do that, that's equal about a 1.4 tax increase. There's performance. So as you may or may not recall, at the town of Canmore, we don't have a step system. So if you've been in your position for a year, there's organizations where you'll get an automatic pay raise up to a maximum. We don't do it that way. Our employees get their raises based on performance reviews. And so what we've historically done is budgeted a pool of money that's then used to pay those performance increases in compensation. There's also the phasing in of increased policing costs. We've talked about this more than once. Coming up when we hit the 15,000 population, they will have increased percentage of the policing costs we have to pay. So we had talked about a plan to start phasing in. As well as I just finished mentioning, we don't quite meet our target of 5% of property tax dollars paying for capital. So there's that to think about. As well as one of Council's strategic priorities in the last strategic plan was to increase reserves, transfers to reserves. That's also covered in the long-term financial strategy where we said our reserves are below where we anticipate they should be. So that's something else that would have to be considered, sort of setting the stage so that you have a little bit of an idea before November. What are things looking like? The other thing to let you know, well, I'm sure you already know, but we're in the middle of conducting an organization review, and we're still working through the draft report. So the consultant who's been doing that work is NAD Consulting. And so far, preliminarily, just sort of looking at draft reports, there's been several issues identified across the organization, such as business process efficiency, management and staff workload capacity, the structure of the organization. We've traditionally grown from a little mining town and grown and grown and grown exponentially at times, but we're still trying to do things predominantly as a small town. And as we get bigger, we're finding that we can't do it the way we've always done it, and we have some growing pains. So this report will address some of those growing pains. There are several recommendations included in the draft report so far that are still being firmed up and finalized. And those recommendations will address the issues that are identified in the report, position the town for growth in the future. So it's not just yeah, we'll solve the problems for right now, but you'll have to redo this in a few years when you continue to grow. No, the idea is a forward thinking, setting us up for success going forward. Generate financial and non-financial efficiencies over the next 2 to 3 years. So I think there's ways that we can actually save some money that will be identified in this report. But to be aware that these recommendations that will be coming out of this report will require some investments in specific areas, such as support services, which includes process reviews, information technology, and consulting. So there's some things that are review this process or streamline that process, and that would require bringing in outside consultants or experts. As well as there's a call for some additional FTEs or full-time equivalent, so staffing positions. So the investment in process, governance, and workflow improvements will actually generate some savings and free up some existing capacity, but it's not going to cover everything. So there will be some budget asks that are coming out of this report. But to remember, improvements will contribute to keeping the required number of new resources to a minimum. So we have spent time with the consultant, and the consultant is very cognizant of the fact that we don't have a money tree in the backyard in Friendship Park, that our budget ability and increases are limited, and yeah, exactly, darn, it would make my life easier if we did. But they're cognizant of that, so it's not a matter of, oh yeah, you got to do everything next year, and it's going to cost you all this money. There's been a lot of thought put into that.
Great.
So we just wanted to, yeah, sorry.
I just wondered, could you expand a little bit on non-financial efficiencies?
Yeah, so I'm just trying to think about that. So if one of the things I think about is getting customers to serve themselves. Okay? So it's not like we're going to save money, but we're going to increase customer service. And it will free up some capacity. So right now, somebody has to come to the front counter and buy a pet license, or they have to go and they have to fill out all these forms for the business license, or in order to get a development permit, they got to go and they got to stand at the counter and talk to somebody and jump through all these hoops. But if we can find some efficiencies to do it where you can go online and you can apply for your development permit, and you can get your pet licensing, and you can find out the balance on your property tax account, then we have customers serving themselves. So therefore, there's some savings. So it's not really financial, but it's in capacity. And in some ways, better customer service. I recognize not all customers like to do it that way, but there are more and more who would prefer, can I just do it at home at 11 o'clock at night? I can't get to you when you're open.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Okay. So also in your package is sort of a proposed timeline and some deadlines. Most of these are for administration, because managers are going to get an email after this once we have the guidelines, and they're going to get sort of the deadlines that are laid out in the schedule. I think the most important part for the Finance Committee is sort of taking a look in the November part, which is where your work will begin in earnest. We thought about trying to reduce the meetings. We done a survey, and everyone said, oh, less meetings, could we try and hold it to 5? But now we're adding a couple of years to the process than we had before. So I don't think this first year is the year to try and cut meetings. We can see how we're doing as the time goes, but I'd sure hate for us to feel pressure. So that way I'm recommending we meet Tuesdays and Thursday mornings in the month of November, and that's a total of 8 meetings. And then the goal, because our last meeting isn't until like the last Thursday in November, we can't turn around a report for the budget approval for the first council meeting in December. So the schedule envisions doing that at the second council meeting in December. And so the idea would be to approve 2019 and 2020 and then adopt the other years as plans. Questions?
Not so much in the way of a question, it's just the conversation, and not to belabor the conversation we had at the workshop, but around establishing the cap on the preliminary operating budgets not to exceed 5%. We had quite a robust conversation about that at the workshop. There was one year where we did it a little differently, and I saw value in that. I really want to explore with administration whether we could sort of look for a blend of what I think this plan is suggesting and what we did a couple of years ago, which was when administration came forward with the whole budget. I mean, here's everything you asked us to deliver. The increase was going to be a 15% tax increase or something. A lot of work for administration to do that, and ultimately council whittled it down, working with administration to reasonable tax impact. I'm just wondering if when council first sees the draft budget, which will reflect not more than 5% tax increase, would we be able to see any sort of a workshop that indicates what the rationale was that administration used to get to that point? So we thought about this and we removed it from the budget because of that.
Yeah, so in the last budget process, we did do a bit of that. We didn't just come and give you the budget. What we did say is, here are the things that we managers had said that they wanted included in the budget, and then through the administrative review process, which is all managers together, and then through the corporate strategic team, which is the CAO, the two GMs, the managers of finance, human resources, and communications, then they take another look and chop things. And so through the last budget process, we did bring you that list of things we had already taken out.
So we'll look for something similar to that.
That's
and
correct.
If council wants to say, you know, we really want to see that left in, then there's some work to do there, yada, yada.
Yes. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Councillor McCallum.
Thank you, Your Worship. I was saving all my questions up to the end because I like listening to your questions. Thank you for your presentation. So I just had a question. I had 3 questions, actually. With regards to how the multi-year capital would work. So we're approving, or will be approving, 2019, 2020. And so when those managers action those approved budgets, they won't be actioning a year. In some ways, in some cases, the 19s will inform the 20s. Does that make sense? So a study in 2019 will inform work that's done in 2020. Or not. They'll just go one after the other. Nobody, or managers won't be pulling the pin on 2020 plans in 2019, though, correct?
Well, I mean,
unless they have permission to do so.
Well, approving those budgets would be their permission. So the idea is not that they do all of their capital projects in 2019 and then sit back in 2020. However, I'll give you an example. I did talk to the manager of facilities, and I did actually send out to managers and said, you know, were there any projects that you were able to start earlier because of the 2-year approval in your capital projects, or so that you could hit the ground running at January 1st? And the feedback I got, especially for the manager of facilities specifically, had said we didn't see the benefit of it because we had to wait until January 1 of the 2018 in order to spend any money on the project. He had said, if I had been able to spend a bit of that money to do the preliminary work, like send out the request for tenders ahead of that, so then I could hit the ground running January 1st, then I would have had the benefit of the 2 years. But if I have to wait to spend any dollars that are in the second year until after January 1, then there wasn't a benefit to the 2 years.
Well, and then so if the entire organization does that, how do we pay for that?
Yeah, so that's where your cash flow, that's where cash flow management comes in. Yeah.
So before those pins are pulled, they'll be talking to you.
And to their GMs.
Right,
yeah.
Okay. My second question was, I noticed a difference in the wording in how we speak of COLA. So for our staff, in the past, we've talked about a Calgary basket of goods, and now we're talking about Calgary CPI.
That's the same thing.
Is it the same thing?
Yes.
Okay, I just wasn't sure. It seemed there to be a difference in the wording that I recollect Ms. Rogers explaining to us before, so I thought I'd ask.
Yeah.
And then the organizational review, so administration is going to be taking some of the recommendations in the organizational review and inserting them into the budget for November. Will council have a chance to approve that review before those changes are inserted? That was it. Thank you.
The CAO didn't have anything to add? No. Are there any other questions from members of the Finance Committee at this time? Seeing none, thanks for your report.
Thank you.
And I guess I'll just assume that typo will be corrected. I don't need to
Yes,
make
I
that
will
through an
correct
amendment.
that.
In which case, I'll move the Finance Committee approve the 2019 to 2024 budget and business plan guidelines as presented. Discussion on the motion. Councillor McCallum.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I will approve or vote in favor of this. I think it'll be interesting to see how the first 2 years go in this fashion with the new rules that are actually hovering over us as to how we were trying to interpret them to be prepared versus now we know what the rules are and how we are need to act as a municipality underneath them. Personally, I don't manage my financial household 1 year at a time. I certainly do look forward. And so I think it behooves us to do the same. And so I appreciate that pressure being put on us by the government to do that, to look, when we're tasked with looking forward as a community, the financial piece has to go alongside of that. But I look forward to seeing if there's any changes or tweaks that need to be made in year 2 or when we do this again in 2 years. So that's all I have to say. Thanks.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think it is good business practice to be looking out further ahead, and not to suggest the town didn't in the past ever think past 1 year out, because we did, but in a more formal way. And council went into the 2-year approval process last year with some trepidation. We weren't sure, and it was somewhat of a trial for us. I think, personally, I think it worked really well. I particularly appreciated the opportunity at the end of last year to tweak the 2018 budget. Yeah, so it's a good process, and it feels appropriate to be following wise business practices in this way. So I'll be happy to support the motion as well. Anybody else speaking to the motion? If not, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. And then I'll move that the Finance Committee be adjourned. Those in favor? Opposed? We're adjourned.